speaking to Pat McCabe in Tamera in Portugal. Pat, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah. My mama named me Patricia Catherine McCabe, and so I call myself Pat McCabe. And I'm from the Deneh people. People know us incorrectly as Navajo, but we call ourselves Deneh, and that's from the southwest of the United States. And I was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and in that way I was given another name, Wiyakpa Najiwi, and that can translate roughly to womaning, standing, shining. Our language is really made up of verbs to acknowledge the nature of reality, which is that it's all energy and it's all in motion. So, yeah, very happy to be here in Tamera.
And what do you do in your daily life?
Gosh, depends on the day, but right now I'm being called to speak and to travel all over the world. And I guess one way to describe what I think my role is that I was raised in modern world culture, I guess we could say, in Western European ideology, in the sense of academia and career and capitalism, the whole thing, but it was so painful for my heart and my spirit that I just couldn't stay with it, and so I ducked out. And at the time, it felt like a terrible failing, but now I know that it was actually a call. And so I feel like I got called back into Indigenous culture, and I actually was first called by the Lakota spiritual way of life, and that way has kind of led me back to my own culture and our ways. But I bring that up because I say that I feel like I'm being called to speak from this radical change in paradigm. It's a radical change in paradigm to go from modern world paradigm to earth-based indigenous paradigm. And so I say one of my greatest gifts to the world right now is to describe that journey, going from the one paradigm to the other. So I'm asked to speak on a variety of subjects and to teach on economy, health, all different kinds of things, because it's such a different perspective. And but one of my favorite subjects that I've been working in deeply has to do with sacred feminine and sacred masculine.
Can you describe that a bit more? We don't normally hear the word sacred masculine, especially. So, what does it mean, and what's the connection?
I know, that's a really interesting phenomenon, isn't it? How can we only have the sacred feminine? So the equation doesn't really add up. Well, and so I guess what I could say about it is that, in the Lakota teaching that I received, that, we all live within this sacred circle of life, or we say sacred hoop of life. And so every living being on this Mother Earth has a seat, a place, is gifted a place on that circle. And even the five-fingered ones, even humanity has been given that place. And so I'm going to say that each member of this sacred hoop has a beautiful, perfect design, a way of harmonizing with the whole rest of the community on this circle of life. And not only harmonizing, but when each one enacts their perfect design, it strengthens everybody else to be able to enact their perfect design. So I say that, even human beings have a perfect design for thriving life. And the question is, are we remembering what that is? And so one of my inquiries is to ask, am I enacting my perfect design for thriving life, or am I not? And part of that question for me, I could explore many different areas, but part of that, my exploration has been what does it mean to have come here as the female of our species? There's something very specific about that, I think, to contribute, to harmonize, and to strengthen the whole hoop. And so that's where my inquiry began, was what does it mean to have come here this way? And from here, I'm able to look to indigenous cultures. Indigenous cultures are very concerned with what is the spiritual capacity. I say our gender gives us a spiritual capacity. That's what I believe that I observe and participate in indigenous ceremony and indigenous prayer life. And so there's a real distinction about that, which I know in modern world has almost become impossible. It's so taboo. But I think we're forgetting something very essential. And so as I began to really know what my biology offers to the sacred hoop as a woman, and so I say, for me, I call myself Holy Earth Surface Walker, life bringer, life bearer. And I stand with the full authority of the Mother Earth, and she stands with me. So in a sense, I always have a place to speak on behalf of life in every situation. I take that as my inherent contribution to humanity's part of the and participation in the sacred hoop of life. So from there, it's a natural inquiry then to then ask, okay, so I might begin to understand what it means to come here as the female, but then what does it mean for my counterpart, for the masculine, for the male to enact their perfect design for thriving life? And so through a lot of journeying, a lot of ceremony, and a lot of travel, I come to this conclusion that we're really equating patriarchy with men, patriarchy with the masculine, and that makes sense, because on the surface it looks like that's what's happening, but what was pointed out to me was that really patriarchy is talking about a paradigm. And that paradigm is what I call the power over paradigm. And so that power is, you have to have power over somebody else in order to have what you need. And so the goal is to try to get higher and higher up in the pyramid of power. And you have to be very aware of where is the power now, and who's got it and who doesn't, and who's gaining it all of a sudden. And if they gain that power, does that mean I have less power? Because that's generally the equation in that system. And so in that system, I say might makes right. Like literally, whoever has the most brute strength is going to dominate in that paradigm. And so the men dominate in that paradigm. And now it's become a little, well, I guess in some ways we could say it's become hidden. But if we look at all the wars going on in the world, it's really not that hidden. The violence of that power, the brute strength power to overpower each other for resources and lands and etc. But what was said to me was, you think you know what masculine is, but you don't. And you think you know what feminine is, but you really don't. All you know is how these two energetics behave when you plug them into the power over paradigm. But if you were to take these same energetics and plug them into a different paradigm, say a paradigm where all the children are fed, all the elders are heard and cared for, then they begin to act in a completely different way. And so this is how I've come to be able to separate men from patriarchy. And so I say, we've been really going in a big, loud conversation all over the world about what we don't want men to do, and what we don't want them to think, and what we don't want them to say, and my heart really hurts actually for them, because they're half of us, and so I know we have to come into harmony. And so I say, we need to begin to, like you just indicated, we have a lot of languaging, and we have certain concepts. Even people who don't come from an ancient indigenous culture, modern women have some concept of sacred feminine, and yet we, by telling the men, we don't like this and we don't like that, but we give them no place to stand. So my inquiry right now is really deeply in what does it mean to be sacred in the masculine? What is that perfect design for thriving life? And here again, I'm going to go back to biology, because I think we haven't been heading in the wrong direction so long that our biology is now working to, show us the way to this death way that we've adopted in modern world. No, our body is still fighting for life and telling us how to live life. So there's a lot to be known from the biology of the men, just as there is from the biology of the women in our culture, or in as part of my inquiry into my culture. So in my inquiry around my perfect design for thriving life as the female, what I've come to learn is that I'm a natural dreamer for the people. and in particular during moon time, and I believe that the women have a capacity to listen directly to the earth and to receive instruction from her during that time. So it's a very sacred time, and I think it's a time that really needs to be supported by community. And that, of course, includes the men, but also the elder women. And so if we could see that time as being a very deep part of our thriving life design, to be able to, what more could we ask for than to receive directly instruction from the Mother Earth about how we're supposed to be here, in each place, in each community. So I'm going to say she has that capacity, and it is related to her biology. And so for the men, I feel like, we can't deny that in the physiology in the biology of the men is this eros. And so right now, that's really being challenged, and there's a lot of outcry about misuse of this medicine. But nevertheless, I'm going to say there must be a way for that very significant aspect of masculinity to be a part of the thriving life design. So our task is to find out, what is it? How can we hold it? How can the men hold it? How can the women hold it? How can the elders and children hold this together as community to say, so that we're all in support of this powerful energy. And I don't think we know what that is yet. Part of the way that I talk about it is I say, it's a sacred fire, and it's actually like an engine that's assuring that life is going to go forward. And so if the plan here on earth is life, which I believe it is, then that's a very sacred and necessary and powerful aspect of our humanity. So now the question is, how do we hold it? In what framework do we hold it? So that we're not like setting wildfires all over the world and burning down our communities and our structures and the hearts of the women. And so I think I don't think it's the right thing. And I feel like in some places the movement is to say to the men, that fire is frightening to me, and I insist that you make it only be this big, burn only this big, so that I can feel safe. I don't think that can be the goal. But then what is it? So this is the kind of inquiry I'm in, and I'm also in the inquiry of remembering, and maybe it's inventing for the first time, or maybe it's just been so long. What is the language of the sacred masculine? So part of my language for them is I say, you're the waker of the dreaming egg, of the dreaming seed, the potential of the seed to grow. You're the banks of the river, and I'm the river. You're the architect of the dreams of the women when they bring the dreams from the earth of how to be here. I feel like I can call upon that masculine way of thinking and being and acting to help me architect how do we build this in our community. So those are certain aspects that are coming around for me around sacred masculine.
So Pat, there's a lot of what one can call sacred activism in what you're doing and what you were saying. What happens very often in our circles of movements and civil society is that these two things are kept separate. The people who are into the spirituality and sacredness and all don't necessarily want to get their hands dirty with political activism, and the ones who are politically active they kind of look a little bit skeptically at the sacred and the spirituality aspects of it. How do you bring these two together?
Well, I think that's a big part of the radical difference in paradigm between modern world paradigm, in which, and certainly in the United States, there was a big action to say, church and state must be kept separate. And I remember being part of a dialogue, a talking circle with an elder, in which he really asked us, do you really believe that church and state should be separate? And, certainly coming out of the Christian society in Europe, where Christianity was attempting to tell everybody what reality was, and if you didn't go along with it, if you challenged it in any way, then you could be be imprisoned, or you were punished in some way, not just spiritually, but in your life, in your physical walking life, and so that's where that sort of came from the United States, but there was a culture going on in what is now known as the United States long before this, and for us, as Indigenous people, I would say everything is done in prayer. Everything is done in prayer, and there's a consultation, and so that's an orientation of humility about our place as well. So we say that the human beings were the last to arrive here on this Mother Earth, and therefore, all the other members, all this other life that's going on around us, these trees, the birds, everybody, they're really our elders, and they're doing their best to model for us, and we used to be able to talk to them very clearly. Sometimes some of us still can, to receive their teaching. They're trying to tell us how to be here, how to harmonize with this within this sacred hoop of life. And so, I feel like, especially now, I say in modern world, our best thinking got us here to this precipice of death, really. And so we need other input. We need a lot of other input. And I think it's a time of humbling ourselves to listen. So even though we feel a tremendous sense of urgency and we want to move fast and big, I think that's exactly the wrong direction. I think what we need to do is be able to listen. Again, listen to this Mother Earth. What is she telling us that is called for from us right now? What is she telling us that we need to do? And so I've been saying, if you don't know how to hear her tell you what is called for, that's your first task. If you want to work at something urgently, work on that. Work on being able to hear. How do I hear her? What are the steps? What have other people done to be able to come into a communion with her? And because I don't think we need to be taking any actions until we fully understand what is called for, which I don't think we can generate that out of our own human understanding. People are trying to generate action for the earth in these giant cities, in these rectangular boxes where everything that's surrounding them is something that came out of the human mind. And we think that's reality. But we're finding out that the reality is that the Mother Earth is actually what's giving us our life, not us. So in that sense, I feel like that's sacred activism to me, is to begin to consult the sacredness of life itself, which is also the Mother Earth, to inform us of what right action is before we take any action.
Earlier on in the conference, you were talking about how your son, anecdotes regarding your son and how his activism with regard to water drilling, I think it was.
That's right. In my community, there's a proposition to drill 14 deep aquifer wells to provide water for my community. And this is water for irrigation, for drinking, for community use. And we're appalled by this proposition. So it's because they want to take the surface water, which has been coming down off the mountain forever, and send that somewhere else. And so in a way, I feel like it's a big experiment with us. And so anyway, my son and members of our community were meeting, and my son had gone to Standing Rock, and also went up to where Winona Leduc is at Line 3 for that pipeline that's being proposed. And so when this arose in our community, he got to witness how they held their sacred activism there. And the way that they held it was they always began in prayer, and they always had the elder women present to give input. And so when this arose in our community in New Mexico, he said, "Mom, we're having a meeting about this water situation. Can you please come, and would you please open with a prayer?" And I was really surprised because we haven't really had that relationship before. I mean, he knows how my life is, but I didn't know that was entering into his life, and I didn't know that he felt strongly about that. And so, yeah, I was so grateful to whatever those elder women did at Standing Rock to make it clear to these young men coming up our role in the Grandmother Lodge to bring deep feminine experience and wisdom into these activism situations.
Thank you. Extremely inspiring. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot for your work and your words. Thank
My
you.
honor. Thank you.